What's poppin', mi gente? Guess who's back with another video. Now, I did promise all of my Patreon subscribers that I was going to do more than just constantly put up, oh, look at me, look what I changed in the SOTN hacked engine, look how special I am type of videos, love me. And I'm a man of my word. So this is going to be the first in a series of tutorial videos designed for teaching people beginner level skills in Unity. Now, this video is very useful for anybody who hasn't dabbled in Unity, or people who have and found it overwhelming and just want to learn more and are having a little trouble getting started in it. And I say this as the voice of experience. I personally began Unity with zero knowledge of it and know what a steep learning curve it was and how long it took me. So I figured for any of my aspiring game programmers out there, let me just create this series. At the same time, I'll show you a couple of new things from the engine for you to enjoy, and hopefully you'll be able to benefit from this. Now, this video is going to be, again, very basic. It's going to be 2D game development. So if you're an advanced Unity user or looking for 3D game development, well, you want to click off right now. At this point, I've only wasted about 1 minute and 11 seconds of your life that you'll never, ever be able to get back. Yes, it's not that serious. You'll live. I've given you fair warning. For those of you still here, outstanding. I'll tell you up front what we're going to cover in the video is going to be setting up the sprite sheets you see in front of you. We're going to do some error checking with them. I'm going to discuss setting up your sprites in Unity in a logical fashion. I'm going to discuss the benefit of having one sprite sheet, a very large one, versus a bunch of multiple smaller ones, and when you want to do that. And I'm even going to show you how to import the sprite, cut it up, and set up the pivot points. So that's enough of an intro. Let's dive right into this. Now, first things first. Do you want to use a large sprite sheet, or do you want to use several smaller sheets with your sprites separated by animation? And the answer is, it depends. If it's a player character and you're only going to have one on screen, well, there's no downside to cutting it up into several smaller sheets. And overall, you're better off like that. Because the truth of the matter is, this massive sheet on the right was initially filled up all the way, up until this row right here. Okay? And believe me when I say it used up a lot of resources. If you want to go ahead and check that in Unity, you can feel free to enter a large sheet yourself and you'll quickly see the difference. Now, mind you, when I'm saying it used up a large amount of resources, I'm talking relatively speaking compared to this. Overall, it's still not, in this day's level of technology, it's not something that's like, oh my god, it's going to slow the game down to a crawl. No, you could probably do it 1,000 times and it wouldn't really affect the game that much. But it's just a good practice in general to monitor your resource use. I'm not talking to the point where you're OCD, because a lot of programmers fall into that trap where they're like, oh, well, I can save, you know, maybe a K here, or I could save half a K there. Well, the truth of the matter is, it all depends how long that takes you. If you spend 5 hours trying to do that, well, that's 5 hours you'll never get back. 5 hours you could have been developing the engine, it wasn't worth it. It really depends. Now, if you're talking a massive drain of resources, well, yes, you need to take the time. So, point is, just think logically when you're making these decisions. In this case, we're going to have one player character on screen. I'm never going to have more than one, so it makes sense to cut up the animations for several reasons. The first of which is that it won't really affect the draw calls. The way draw calls work is, let's say you have 10 enemies on the screen. If you have 10 enemies on the screen, and they each use a different sprite from a different sheet, that's 10 draw calls. If instead those 10 enemies use 10 different sprites, but the sprites are all on one giant sheet like this, it's one draw call. So obviously for enemies, they could each be on a different sprite and a different animation. You want to use one sheet, especially because they're usually not going to be that big. But for a player character, there'll only be one of it on the screen at any time. At most 2 if you're doing a doppelganger fight, or even if it's multiplayer, you might have 4 or 5. That's not a big deal compared to having possibly 30 of a small enemy on the screen, or a projectile of some kind, and each and every one of those is using a different draw call. So, for player characters, I use different sheets with the animations broken up. The other good side of it is when you're doing animations, it's possible for the sprite to become disassociated with the animation if you change the wrong thing. Now, this was an issue in older versions of Unity that was a real nightmare. In newer versions, I haven't had it happen to me yet. I won't really go into animations any more than that, just take my word on it. That might be something for a second vid where I set up a couple of animations, maybe talk about the animator controller. But right now, we're going to talk about the basics. So first, I have one simple animation I just had an artist draw for me, and that's a looping one where Richter charges up his MP right here. The red outlines are just in case I want to use some kind of outline effect later. Yes, there are shaders you can use for that. Yes, you can also take this particular game object and create another object slightly taller than it, but the problem is Well, it's going to be a number of issues. Is one, I'm going to set the pivot point to be in the middle, which we'll discuss shortly, so when I rotate it, it'll rotate around the middle. So guess what? If I decide to do the latter suggestion, which is just make a sprite slightly bigger than him while keeping it aligned perfectly so it doesn't shine underneath his feet, is a problem. This is just much simpler for customization purposes and very easy to do in just about any paint program. Heck, I do this in Game Maker. I simply pick to outline the sprite and we're good to go. But I digress a little bit here. That's the reason behind the outline. The palette is here because I'm using a palette shader, and this is also an error check. Okay, with the palette shader, it is set up so that it only reads the R values in each RGB. Now, RGB is red, green, and blue. There's also an A value, an alpha value, but I don't really use any shaders that read that. Don't really see a point in it for what I'm doing. Now, normally what people will do is have it read the RGB values, so it checks all three. Well, I have it just read the R value, so it cuts down on processing. And you'll see here every R value is unique, which is very easy to do. I mean, this sprite only has 31 colors. That's an exceedingly easy thing to do. So my error check is going to be to check if there's a certain number of colors, and yep, I have the palette here, 31 colors. If it said 32, 33, I would know we have an issue. We're missing a color. We have an extra color somewhere. Hunt it down and kill it. And how I would do that is something like this, for example. Now, I changed this color on purpose before we started the video, just so you guys could see, okay, well, you know, this is an example of what you can use, and that's the magic wand. You would click on the stray pixel. If you didn't know where it was, if you had no idea, you want to highlight all of these pixels, and then just see what isn't highlighted. And that's what you want to aim for, one of those pixels, and then just click on it like this, and you're good to go. But in this case, I did this just to speed things up, so I already know the pixels are here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to my paintbrush, and I'm just picking a large size. I have the color selected, which all I'm doing is changing the R value to 1 here, as an example. And I'm going to do this. And that's it. We're set to go. It has now replaced all of those values with the correct one, and it's good. Okay, now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take this sheet and combine it with this one, because I already entered this one in Unity, but I had an edit done for the cycling. Something I am going to point out when you're putting sheets into Unity for sprites. If you are editing a sheet you have in Unity, you always want to make sure that if you're going to resize the canvas, that you make the placement to the upper left. And if that doesn't make sense to you, well, go ahead and do it in Unity without doing it, and you'll see how whatever boxes you set up are thrown all over the place, and that's a real headache. I'll discuss that in more detail a little later. But right now, I'm going to resize this image. It's already in Unity, and all I need it to be is a little wider. Let's go ahead and do that. No, that's not what I meant to do. Excuse me. Let's try this one more time. Just make it a large, crazy size, okay? And this is basic image editing, so I'm not really going to go into detail on this. There's a million things you can Google for this. But it's just literally dragging and dropping. For those of you who are artists and are cringing, please excuse me if I'm not using proper terminology here, but again, I have no artistic skill. I mean, if I drew a stick figure right now for you people, you guys would look at it and go, ooh, what is it, a dog, a cat, a rat? I mean, it's that bad. Yeah, it's my artistic skills are just god-awful. Let's leave it at that. Okay, so I'm putting a gap between each and every sprite so that when I have Unity automatically detect the hitboxes for it, or the sprites boxes to separate each one, it isn't trying to say that, let's say that these two sprites are joined together. Another issue was, in older versions of Unity, if I had them together with no gap, you would get what I call pixel bleeding. If I put these two next to each other, this sprite would get some of the red from here bleeding on its arm here, and this one would get some of the red from this arm bleeding onto its fist here. And that just didn't work. So I put a gap between them, but if you did it like this, that used to be an issue. It's also good practice to leave a gap between your sprites like this. I mean, there's no reason, honestly, not to. Okay, so now I'm just going to go ahead and crop this. And once again, I'm going to do a check to make sure something gets screwy here. 31 colors. Okay, we are set to go. And let's go ahead and do this. And this one's going to be charge MP right here. Okay, now I don't use any kind of compression on this because these are low-res sprites, and it'll mess with the shader. You don't need it. I'm going to change, again, this has to be changed to point because I'm using a shader. If I have bilinear, well, the shader's going to have trouble because colors are going to be mixed and matched, and I need read, write, enabled so the shader will detect it. Full rectangle because I don't need a tight mesh. These are going to be rectangular. And pixels per unit, I'm going to pick 10. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to make it so 1 pixel equals 0.10. If you picked 1 pixel would equal 1. Again, this is something I'm doing because Unity used to have issues in this area that have long since been fixed, but at this point it would be ridiculous to go back and change everything. So, 10 pixels per unit if you want to use 1, so you have 1 pixel equals 1 on the X transform or Y. If you move it over 1, it's 1 pixel. That's probably easier. And multiple, because this sprite has multiple frames. I don't want this whole sheet to be just one image. Now, just to be consistent before I change anything, I'm actually going to go ahead and change the canvas very slightly. I like to align everything. Part of being a programmer, I like to keep everything in a logically ordered fashion. That was the wrong thing. I need to learn how to read. Okay, so 223, 48. And this is only being done so that I can keep all these aligned at the feet here. Again, OCD type thing. Don't pay no mind to this part. I might just cut it out of the video. Actually, I'm not, because I've had a couple of drinks. I'm in a lazy damn mood after working all day and then spending about 4 hours on the engine, so bear with me, people. Don't string me up. Don't tie me to the stake and light me on fire like my last name is Tepish. First name Lisa. Don't do it, guys. Don't do it. Let your boy live. Yeah, I know, that joke was so fucking bad that forget sending it to jail. They put that motherfucker in front of a firing squad. Alright, so now we have a sheet here. We want to cut this up, and this is why I'm going to use slice here. I'm going to pick automatic. I want the pivot point in the center for these particular sprites. And delete existing in case there's anything there already. There won't be because we loaded this sheet in. We slice it. And because I put the palette in the corner, it's going to read this as part of it. All I did was hit this little button to turn it black and white. It's easier to see the box. See how the palette's part of this sprite? So I'm just going to shrink that. But notice how the rest of them are perfect. If I put them right next to each other, we would have had an issue. I would have had to resize and change boxes here. I named it appropriately Charge MP, so now the naming convention is already done for me. I'm not going to change the position. This is all already automatically set, as you can see here. The pivot point is this thing in the center. If I change this, it will change how the entire sprite will rotate. So if I put it down here, it'll rotate by this point instead from the feet. If I put it in the middle where we're going to want it, it'll rotate by the middle. And I'll probably go into pivot points at a later date some more, but for our purposes here, we're just going to go ahead and put it in the middle. And for most things you're going to want to do, you're going to want to put it in the middle. Now, if you're doing something like the wolf form, something that's glued by, let's pretend that it's glued by this part here, then you want to put your pivot point up here. Because that's the point you'd want it to rotate by as a limb. So if it was just an arm, we want to rotate here at the shoulder, you'd put it here. But again, because this is a whole image, we want to rotate it by the middle, so that this whole thing spins by the central point. One more thing we're going to want to do. Pivot unit mode. Needs to be pixels. And the reason is because when you're doing these animations, if you want to make them pixel perfect, this right here will be a headache. This extra decimal value. The reason is the way it is, instead of you having a, let's say if you used a 1 pixels per unit and 1 pixel equal moving 1 on the screen, well, what's going to happen is you're going to have to move by 0.5 when you're doing your animations. That just slows you down. Just take my word for it. Make these flat, whole values. Do not make them point values. There's no reason behind it. It's just going to give you a headache. So I'm going to hit apply here. We have the boxes set up. This one didn't, so I'm going to pick center. And then I'm going to go to custom. He says 11.5. I'm going to delete anything after the decimal. It's always going to be a 0.5 if you pick pixels. So I'm going to delete that. So it's a nice rounded number. And what this is going to do is it's going to cut out some time when we're doing animations. I mean, you could always go in and move them around by 0.5, or in my case, it's a 10 pixels per unit ratio, so it'd be 0.05, but that's slow. Very slow. Versus just being able to use a trick I'm going to show you where you just snap things to the position you need. And again, that's something I'll discuss in a later video. Okay, so we are just about done now. Okay, great. Now I'm going to hit apply to finalize that. If I hit revert, it'll undo all the changes I made since I last saved. If I hadn't saved anything, this wouldn't even be highlighted, so it wouldn't matter. Hit apply, and if you want to check your box, do that. You get a nice black and white view again. See, we have all of Richter's sprites set up. Now we can go to the sheet, and for those who didn't catch it before, all I did was import new asset and pick the image file, and then we made those changes to the settings here as I was talking about. My apologies if I skipped that step, but you guys are smart people. I didn't really want to hold your dicks while you piss. You'll notice we have them all set up in a logical order rather, excuse me. Now when I do my animation, I have to set up the timings, but I know, okay, 0, 1, 2, oh, okay, and we have the 2, and this is where the cycling takes place. So cycle it as many times as I need to 3, 4, and 5, and this is where the animation works. This is where the animation ends, rather. And this will work great because what I'll do is I'll break up the animation to be 0, 1, and 2. As you can see here, are going to be just a start animation. And then I'll pick a cycling one that's 3, 4, and 5, and then I'll make an ending one. So we'll have 3 separate animations. And what will happen is if I want to loop this one, it's just a simple animation with 3 sprites. If for some reason he's not going to charge MP, well, at the end of the animation 1, let's call it charge MP start for these 3, he'll stop on this sprite right here, and the animation will end and just stay frozen there, so it'll look correct. And then if he's charging MP, it'll keep looping through these 3. And when the animation ends, it'll just go through this quick 3-frame animation before it leads back to idle. And again, animations are something I'll discuss later, because the video is already going on almost 16 minutes here. These things take time, people, and this is very basic. But notice I'm cutting out a lot of the fluff for that reason. So I apologize if this is a little quick, but if I went into more detail here, we could literally be here 30 minutes discussing this. Okay, so next up, let's talk about arranging things in a logical fashion. If you look at my folders here, you'll notice that I have 1 for pickups and I have a 0 in front of it because I always want this to be in order under my objects folder, and then I have 1 for players next. And this is because pickups were something that's going to apply to all players, so I said, okay, let's do this first, and let's put the players afterwards. I have folder 00, which Alucard is the default character. 01 will be Richter. Now, because old Richter is a character that's only going to be used in the intro for the moment, I again may come out with a classic mode eventually, but that'll be very far down the line. I said, okay, well, 01 is going to be Richter. Let's add a 1 in front of that and make it old Richter, so we have plenty of space to work in here if I want to add extra characters like 02 would be Maria, 03 would be whoever, 04 would be whoever, and so on and so forth. And if I made an old version of Richter, he would be 10, old Alucard. So I'm putting things in a logical fashion. Don't pay any mind to these folders down here. I haven't really put them in any kind of numerical order yet because, well, because I've been a lazy bastard. I've been too busy coding things for Alucard and working and etc, etc. But if you look in Richter's folder, we're going to look at main, and he has animations. You see they're in numbers. There's a number here because if I just put letters here, I mean, it'd be in alphabetical order, and that's not going to be the order of the animations. Like, idle is going to be the first animation, then walking, crouching, and it's just in a logical order that if I looked at Alucards, something I came up with that I wanted to be consistent with. This way, as I'm looking through the folders, I can find everything I need quickly and efficiently. Also, when I'm setting up sprite sheets and doing behavior scripts associated with that each animation, I have already figured out how I want to break them up. So this is the way I came up with, but again, whichever way you do your folders, make it a logical fashion that's easy to read and find things. You would be surprised how much time you'll spend clicking through folders looking for stuff, and it adds up. If you even spend, let's say, 10 seconds clicking through folders looking for stuff, and you have to look for stuff 100 times a day, that is 1,000 seconds, people. That doesn't sound like a lot, does it? But let's do some basic math here. There are 60 seconds in a minute. So right there, you are talking over 16 minutes you've wasted in a day looking around. So yeah, this stuff adds up, guys. Okay, definitely do things in a logical fashion. If it takes a little longer in the beginning, don't worry about it. Okay, it's not a big deal. You're better off doing that because in the long run, it'll save you an astronomical amount of time. And this is why editing and tweaking things is so quick for me. And with that, that's all I've really got to talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and jump off this vid and get back to coding here. But before I go, what kind of vids would you guys like to see up here? Like, what kind of stuff would you like me to go over in Unity or related to the engine itself, etc.? I do have plans next time to put up a video on basic animations and dealing with the animator component, but if you have any questions, feel free to put them below, and I'll be more than happy to try to put something up in the near future to keep you guys happy. And with that, again, I've run my mouth more than enough here, so I'm out. Hope you all enjoyed the video. Deuces.